We could say that an elevated resistance leads to elevated pressure. Okay? So if you can walk yourself through some of these concepts and make sense of them, I think you'll find that you'll have a lot more confidence in this equation. Okay? We could take another tack and we could say, what if resistance goes down? What if we dilate? What's going to happen to your pressure? But you can run through a couple of examples like that if you like in your brains. Okay, we got to move on. So everybody's favorite thing is mean arterial pressure. So I want you to think of it like this. Here's your aorta. You've got flow coming in and flow going out, and these should be equivalent to one another, right, over time. Cardiac output is what goes in, right? What's opposing flow? By definition, it's resistance, right? So here's our little equation. So flow equals delta P over R. And we can substitute our values for the systemic circulation to try to understand what's happening here. Okay. And we've got cardiac output equals MAP over TPR. And we could rearrange this in a way that we could calculate mean arterial pressure if we wanted to. Okay. And we could separate cardiac output into its two components, right? You know that cardiac output is formed by heart rate times stroke volume, right? So mathematically, we can see there are three things that will determine our blood pressure. Okay. Heart rate. And these all work directionally the same way, right? So if your heart rate goes up, what's going to happen to mean arterial pressure? It's going to go up. Okay. Stroke volume goes up, MAP goes up. If resistance increases, so does MAP. Okay. So all of these things are going to contribute to your mean arterial pressure. Okay. So that's mathematical explanation for it. If you want to sort of visualize this, think of it this way. If we increase cardiac output, we're going to be pushing more blood in. Okay, so we're going to be increasing the flow of blood into that system without affecting anything about resistance on the other side. Okay. And of course, we know that cardiac output is either heart rate, stroke volume, or both, right? So if we increase cardiac output in any way, instead of 5 liters per minute, maybe we go to 6 or 7 or 10. Okay. Our mean arterial pressure is going to go up. All right, so that's heart rate, stroke volume. What's the other way we could do this? We could increase resistance. Okay. And now what have we done? We have a normal cardiac output, but we're restricting the outflow. Okay. And mean arterial pressure goes up. So if you want to look at it mathematically, like we did, or if you want to conceptualize it like this in terms of vessels stretching because of an imbalance between what's putting in and what's coming out, either way it works fine. So if somebody has a high blood pressure, what are the things that would explain it? Maybe they have an increased heart rate. What else? Yeah.
Maybe they have a high volume of blood, so their stroke volume is higher than usual.
Okay, maybe we got high volume of blood. Well, lots of blood comes back to the heart, and we increase stroke volume, right, through that preload. Yeah.
Or they have like plaque in their arteries, so you have more resistance.
So that's interesting. Plaque in the vessels. Yeah. So if we're talking about a constriction due to plaque, that would be something that would increase resistance, right? There's another way that that can influence that, and that has to do with compliance. And we'll come back around to that idea, so hold on to that thought somewhere in your brain. All right, so we can increase stroke volume, we can increase heart rate, we might increase resistance, okay? Yeah, plaque might do it, how else could you do it? What if you gain 40 pounds? And you get a whole bunch of new blood vessels, increase the length of your vessel, right? And so that the more body mass you have, muscle or fat, doesn't matter, you're gonna have more blood vessels than somebody with less mass, right? Or your previous self, as the case may be, okay? So, let's run through some examples here. What if we raise or increase the amount of vasoconstriction? What's this going to do to MAP? Vasoconstriction causes an increase in resistance, so we raise MAP. You don't want to see me write these first, so you can just point. Vasodilation. Shout it out, there you go. Heart rate, lower heart rate means lower MAP. Epinephrine. Just thinking about what it does to the heart, what's it going to do to the heart? Increase heart rate and contractility, right? Stroke volume, right? Because epinephrine is going to be able to bind to both contractile and electrical cells in the heart, or pacemaker cells. Yeah, so raise MAP. Thyroid hormone? Raise it. Why? Yeah, we're increasing the number of adrenergic receptors in the heart, right? So therefore, we're going to have a greater sensitivity to epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay. Low venous return. Oops. Lower. Lower contractility of the heart. Lower. Increased afterload. What is an increased afterload? It's a high MAP, right? So if you have a high MAP, that's going to cause the heart to put less blood into your aorta, right? So it's going to lower MAP. Blood viscosity goes up. It's more viscous, raised. Okay. How could that happen? Maybe you injected yourself with EPO because you're a cyclist, right? And you get all kinds of blood vessels, or blood cells forming, lots of red blood cells. Increase in viscosity. Yeah. Yeah. So she said explain contractility. Did I do it the wrong way? So contractility. So if we have a cardiac cell and we increase contractility, we're talking about our heart here. If we increase contractility, what that means is that we're ejecting more volume from the heart.
I was guessing compliance.
Yeah. So these are some things that I don't know, can help you just to have some examples of things to run through. Anything here not make sense to you? Yes?
Can you re-explain the increased afterload?
Oh, yes. So an increased afterload is, an afterload is the pressure that's out here in the aorta, right? That's your aorta. And if the pressure here is high, okay, that is by definition a high afterload, okay? When the ventricle is contracting, it is not going to be able to move as much volume out, okay? So when the heart contracts, we have the high pressure, so we have the extended isovolumetric phase, and there's less ejection. So with less ejection, that means a lower stroke volume. Lower stroke volume means less cardiac output. That make sense? Okay. All right. Any more thing? It's fun, isn't it? Okay, so we've talked as much as I intend to talk about the aorta and the large arteries. We'll talk about arterioles because
they're not just small arteries, they have a very distinct role to play. Okay, so arteries branch and get smaller and branch and smaller and branch. And when they get small enough, we'll call them arterioles, but they have a disproportionately high amount of muscle attached to them. And arterioles are sort of the gatekeepers to the capillaries downstream. Okay. So they control flow downstream, and they control resistance where they are, affecting pressure upstream. Okay, so let me draw that for you, if that doesn't make any sense. Let's say we've got large arteries becoming a smaller arteriole, branching to form a capillary. Capillaries come together to form venules, veins, so and so on. Okay, the arterioles are very muscular. Okay, and so blood is flowing in this direction, and so when they constrict, they will increase resistance, right? And so by increasing resistance, they can affect the pressure in the upstream direction. By upstream, I mean closer to the heart. Okay. And that same arterial constricting can lower flow behind it. Okay. So the placement of arterioles between arteries and capillaries means that they will have different effects on these different parts of the circulatory system. Okay. So let's talk about one aspect of what they do. One of the things they do is they control flow to capillaries. And there's a phenomenon that you're all probably familiar with. Let's say you, well, let's walk through it and then we'll talk about examples of this. The arterioles and the capillaries right behind them that they serve are surrounded by a bunch of cells, right? And those cells are getting their oxygen from capillaries, and they're providing carbon dioxide that gets pulled into the capillaries to be removed from the body. And so one of the things that happens is that if we have a balance between oxygen consumption by the cells and oxygen delivery from the blood vessels, everything is fine. Everything's copacetic. We like that. We like it when the oxygen demands of the cells are being met by the delivery of oxygen from the blood. Okay? And CO2 works in the opposite way, right? Cells are producing CO2 through cellular respiration, right? And as CO2 is removed, okay, effectively by the blood. But what can happen is, let's say our cells have an increased metabolic rate. Okay? Let's say our cells become more active. They're doing something. Okay? Now their consumption of oxygen becomes high, right? And on the right here. And the delivery of oxygen becomes insufficient. Okay? And likewise, CO2 goes up from the cells because they're respiring more often, right? Or more frequently, greater rate. So the CO2 removal is insufficient. Okay, so we get an imbalance here. And what happens is that arterioles have a role to play here in regulating the blood flow to the capillary. And they take signals from the cells. Okay, some of the most common signals are CO2 and oxygen. Okay, so our arterioles will respond to CO2 and oxygen. Okay, so what happens? In response to a low amount of oxygen in that cellular environment around the arterioles, those arterioles will dilate. And when they dilate, more blood can flow into that capillary, which means we get a greater amount of oxygen delivery. We have greater capacity to carry carbon dioxide away with that excess extra blood. Okay. Right. So this this is how we can respond to local signals, right? So arterioles have this very important role in responding locally. So this is not a nervous system control thing, and it's all entirely local. Okay, so you can have capillary in your left arm doing something different than in your right arm. Or arterial, excuse me, doing something different in different parts of your body. And they all make little adjustments all the time according to the need of the cell that they're serving. Okay, so this is called active hyperemia. Hyperemia is increased blood flow or high blood flow. Okay, and it's an active process, meaning that we actively control the blood flow. Okay, to meet demands. Okay, so that's the definition there at the top, active hyperemia. This is the normal thing that's happening all day long. And once oxygen demand is met, they taper off a little bit, and maybe if there's too much oxygen around the cells, then they constrict. Okay. Reactive hyperemia. What are we responding to here? Anybody know?
Reduced flow.
Reduced flow. Okay. So you can do this sometime when I'm not around because I didn't tell you to do it. But you could put a belt around your arm, or a tourniquet, or your roommate's shirt, tie it around real tight. And what happens is you get a reduced amount of blood flow downstream of that, right? So if you do this in your arm, your hand is going to experience low oxygen, right? Because it's consuming oxygen, but it's not getting new oxygen delivered. Okay. So reactive hyperemia happens when we have some occlusion blockage temporarily, and then it's removed. And what happens is your blood vessels don't go back to normal. They go to a hyperemia state, right? They dilate to provide lots of blood flow. Okay, so if you do this, take off the tourniquet, and you'll get all kinds of blood flow, and your arm will feel hot, right? All this blood flow, right? Probably hurt because of the swelling that's happening in your hand. Okay, so that's reactive hyperemia. The other time you might encounter this is if you go outside and it's very, very cold out, right? All of your blood vessels are constricting, right? In your skin and around your fingers, and then you come inside to normal room temperature and your vessels dilate and it feels like your hands are on fire, right? Ever had that? This is a reactive thing that occurs when we have an occlusion or reduced flow suddenly return to normal. Yeah.
When they take your blood, sometimes they'll put like a tourniquet on the top of it.
Yeah.
Before they do it. Does this have something to do with it?
When they put, if they're taking blood, they put a tourniquet on there to make your veins stand out. Right? So they're preventing, if you put it here, you're preventing blood from going back, and so you get a buildup of venous pressure, which helps them find your veins easier. Not quite the same. All right, so metabolic activity is one way we regulate arterioles. It's called flow autoregulation. Right? This is not a systemic thing. It's just every arteriole for itself. Right? It's responding to the local environment. CO2, oxygen, H+, which happens whenever we build up carbon dioxide. Okay. Those are the most important ones to remember. We can have this happen not for reasons of ensuring great metabolic demand, but because there's an inflammatory response. Okay. So your finger might swell up because you have a tourniquet on, right? And metabolic activity is low, right? Or it might swell up because you hit it with a hammer, right? You've initiated an inflammatory response, or a mosquito bite. And this is the result of the cells releasing chemicals to cause the vasodilation. Right? Okay. One other thing that has to do with autoregulation, you may have encountered this when you studied the kidney, if you haven't studied the kidney, I know you did. There's something called the myogenic response, where if blood pressure goes up, the arterioles responsively or reflexively will contract.
So if you've got arteries artery here, arterial here, and suddenly the blood pressure goes up, right? You've got capillary downstream.
If blood pressure goes up, there's, we reflexively constrict, right? And this it's kind of a protective mechanism, right? Because what can happen to your capillary if pressure goes up? Yeah, it bursts, right? So if pressure goes up high in your arteries, that would translate to your capillaries as well, right? And capillaries are really delicate, right? So what we can do is we can constrict, right? This is called a myogenic response because smooth muscle is responding to stretch, okay? The smooth muscle in the arterial is stretched, therefore it contracts. And by contracting, it'll reduce flow downstream of that constriction, and that's going to prevent buildup of pressure. Okay. So myogenic response, we'll counter that again with the kidney, it'll be great fun, okay, promise. All kidney things are fun. Angiogenesis, ever heard of this? What is it? Blood vessels growing, right? That 20 pounds of muscle you gained, you need new, or fat, but it's muscle, right? You add new blood vessels to serve that extra tissue, right? So angiogenesis is stimulated by a low oxygen, okay? So not just temporary, tourniquet effect, but if it's a prolonged thing, you just don't have enough oxygen in certain parts of your body, you're going to increase the number of blood vessels that serve that part of your body, okay? Tumors do this, right? You have cancer, highly metabolically active, consumes lots of oxygen, and it stimulates its own vascularization so that it can survive. Okay. There are some anti-cancer targets that target angiogenesis to prevent it. Okay, so these are all different ways that the body uses to regulate flow through arterioles. Okay. Which of these would take a long time, and which are temporary? There's only one that's long-term. Yeah, it's angiogenesis, right? All of these other things are happening moment by moment. Okay. And again, they're all local. We say autoregulation, we're talking about at that location, not a systemic response. Okay. So let's talk about those systemic responses. We call these extrinsic controls because they're coming from outside. They're not coming from within those local capillaries. But now we're talking about an extrinsic control, something from the outside. Okay? So in order to do this, we need to talk a little bit about smooth muscle. Okay? So we talked about cardiac muscle. We said cardiac muscle is stimulated by L-type channels opening up, right? L-type channel opens up, calcium flows in, right? And what's calcium going to bind in the cardiac muscle cell when it comes in? Exactly, the ryanodine receptor, right? And then a whole bunch more calcium goes into the cytosol, and it binds troponin, excuse me, yeah. I learned it, troponin, and I've been trying to fix that ever since. Yeah, so it binds troponin. So calcium is going to set off all these changes and lead to the contraction of a cardiac muscle cell. Smooth muscle is different. So what happens is we have calcium still involved, okay? It does not bind troponin. It instead binds a protein called calmodulin, okay? And calmodulin works on a protein that's called myosin light chain kinase. Okay, you know what myosin is, right? What's myosin? That's the contractile thing. Yeah, okay. That's why there's little things with heads on, they pull on the actin, right? Myosin has different proteins. There's light chains and heavy chains that contribute to the myosin molecule. And the light chain can be phosphorylated. Okay, so there's a kinase here that phosphorylates myosin. Okay, so unlike skeletal muscle or cardiac muscle, what has to happen for smooth muscle to contract is that it needs to be phosphorylated. Kind of a weird thing, but it behaves a little different. It doesn't require simply calcium to bind troponin and move tropomyosin out of the way and all that kind of stuff. Here we have myosin requiring phosphorylation. There's another enzyme here called myosin light chain phosphatase. What do you suppose it does? It removes phosphates. Okay? So if we put some phosphates onto our myosin, we'll get contraction. But if that's all that happens, what's going to happen is eventually that phosphatase will take them off, right? And you'll stop contraction. So we have this sort of antagonism in the cell between myosin light chain kinase, which phosphorylates, and phosphatase, which removes phosphates. Okay? And it's the role of calcium, a little bit different than in other muscle cells we've seen. But calcium, through calmodulin, will stimulate the kinase. Okay? So, in order to control this from above, right, from our brains, we need the nervous system, okay? Or we can use the nervous system. And generally speaking, we have the sympathetic nervous system innervating arterioles throughout the body. Okay? And so sympathetic neurons are going to release norepinephrine, remember that? Yeah. And we have a new type of receptor. You've never seen it before. It's just like the beta 1, but it's different. How's it different? It's called alpha 1, all right? And it's blue instead of green. Alpha 1 receptor up there. So your smooth muscle and your arterioles will have alpha 1 receptors, and they'll have sympathetic neurons going to them. In the event that we want to control arteriolar constriction, we can do it with the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so how's it work? All right, one thing. This involves a different second messenger system. Hopefully you saw the video. If not, take a look at that on Sakai. I'll walk you through the steps in a little bit more detail than I'll do here. And what we've got here is a system that doesn't use cyclic AMP. Okay, so it's not a GS that stimulates, and it's not a GI that inhibits the production of cyclic AMP. Okay? Instead, it's going to activate phospholipase C. Okay, so we call this a GQ protein, right? So the G proteins, there are only 3 in the body. We have GS, GI, and GQ. Okay, this is Q. S and I are concerned with cyclic AMP, either stimulation or inhibition, right? And GQ is concerned with phospholipase C as an enzyme, okay? So, PIP2 is a chemical that gets converted into 2 second messengers, IP3 and DAG, DAG. I don't expect, you don't have to know the names of these things. Probably be good if you did, but for the testing purposes, you won't. I know a bunch of you haven't had biochemistry, and this learning the names of these things is kind of without purpose. So just remember what they are for now. Okay. So PIP2 is a phospholipid actually, and it gets converted to IP3 and DAG. Okay. Let's take the DAG path. Right, we're gonna turn on PKC, just like we did before. Instead of PKA, we're calling it PKC. It's a different protein, but it's a kinase. Okay, and what it does is it inhibits this guy down here. Okay, who's that? Myosin light chain phosphatase. Okay, so the phosphatase is what removes phosphates. Okay. So we're going to be inhibiting that. And then on the other side, the IP3 is going to stimulate the release of calcium from the ER or SR. Right? Calcium binds to calmodulin, as we talked about, which activates myosin light chain kinase. Okay? So in a nutshell, there's a lot of things here, right? But what we're doing overall is we have norepinephrine as our first messenger. We generate some second messengers in the middle, inside the cell. but we activate the kinase and we inhibit the phosphatase. Okay, so the end result is going to be what? Contraction, right? Through phosphorylation of myosin. Why can't everything be this simple? It's nothing to it, right? So this is happening, and it's when we do this, when we stimulate this, we refer to this as sympathetic tone, because very often this is happening pretty regularly. That we've got some degree of contraction, and with more stimulation from norepinephrine, we get more contraction, more phosphorylation, right, for longer periods of time. Weston, do you have a question?
Is PKC inhibiting the myosin, is it long-chain phosphatase by phosphorylating?
Yeah, so this may be the first time you've seen that in this course anyway. Phosphorylation doesn't always activate, it can sometimes inhibit. So don't think of phosphorylation as always activating. This is a way of modifying the activity of an enzyme. And sometimes that activity will go up and sometimes it goes down. Okay, so in this case, it decreases its activity. We need more cell biology, don't we? Okay. Fun facts that'll help you later in life and later in this class. Not only are we responding to potentially the nervous system, we can have some hormones, right? So, ever heard of ADH? Okay, bonus points for anybody who knows this. What is the other name for ADH? Vasopressin. Which is not relevant, except for the fact that that's where we get the V from the name of its receptor. Okay, so there's a receptor here called V1 receptor. Okay, and because 2 is not enough, there's a third type of receptor for angiotensin 2. Ever heard of that thing? We'll come back to these at some point. No, I do not expect you guys to remember what these things do from 252. But one of the things that I want to point out is the angiotensin 2 receptor and our vasopressin receptor, or alpha-1 adrenergic receptor. These are all distinct G protein coupled receptors, but they all use the same GQ protein. Okay. Which means for the cell, what? How does the cell interpret those 3 different signals? It's the same. Okay? So we have 3 different ways of stimulating these smooth muscle cells for 3 different purposes in the body. And sometimes we're affecting arterioles and kidneys, and sometimes we're affecting arterioles and some other cells in the heart. We can have lots of different combinations of things because we have all these different receptors. Okay? So these hormones can control vasoconstriction of arterioles as well. Okay? And we have in some places a way to vasodilate. Okay? Not as common that we'd want to do this on a systemic level, but we have something called a beta-2 receptor. Is this the one we find in the heart? No. That was the beta one. Okay. It responds to epinephrine. Does not receive sympathetic innervation, but it can respond to epinephrine. And it leads to vasodilation. Okay. Where do we find this? Skeletal muscle. Okay. The arterioles that serve skeletal muscle. So in a fight or flight response, what's going to happen? We're going to have constriction through norepinephrine of most of our arterioles. Okay. If we constrict arterioles, what happens to MAP? Goes up, right? Because why? We're elevating resistance, right? So vasoconstriction throughout the body is going to happen in the fight or flight response, and it's going to elevate mean arterial pressure. Okay? But what's happening in our skeletal muscles? If we dilate those arterioles, what's going to happen to what? Yeah, it's gonna preferentially move to the skeletal muscles. Okay, so we can have, if I back up here for a moment, see if I can find that picture. Be a good place to stop too. Like stopping right. So here you can see we've got all these little numbers listed here. 15%, 5%. This is talking about the percentage of the cardiac output. Okay. And if you look down here, skeletal muscles gets a pretty substantial amount of your cardiac output, right? But if you dilate those arterioles and constrict most of the others, what's going to happen to the amount of blood that goes to your skeletal muscles? It goes way up. Okay? So we're going to be enhancing the flow of blood to skeletal muscles and restricting it from other places in the body. Okay? And why is that beneficial? To run away. That's right. Perfect. Right? So fight or flight response, we need to prepare our bodies for immediate action, right? And so it's not that we cut off blood from everywhere else, it's just we redirect some proportion of blood over the skeletal muscles so that we can act. Okay? Make sense? So when you think about these systemic controls, we're doing it to change blood pressure sometimes. We're doing it to change blood flow distribution other times. Okay? Sometimes it's both. All right, so we got local controls, we've got the systemic controls. Right? Try to put that in your head, make sure you understand what that's all about. And we'll certainly take questions on that. I've got a little bit more here next time.